At his COVID-19 press conference on Sunday, I was watching Donald Trump talking about the situation the country was in and so on. And I realized that the man had changed quite a bit, that I'd noticed a considerable change in the president's behavior. And after he was finished speaking, I became convinced that the change is that Donald Trump is becoming a war president. And there's no doubt that this is a war. It's going to take hundreds of almost certainly going to take thousands and thousands of American lives. And the funny thing about war presidents is they're not war presidents when they're elected. The presence of a catastrophe or a war elevates them. We saw the same thing with George Bush after 9/11 and many other examples throughout history. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your right angle on President Trump's, not only his actual physical response in terms of what he's doing as policy, but just the overall change in tone with the president. Guys, I'll just preface this by saying that on that particular press conference, the president was filled with praise for Governor Cuomo of New York, Governor Newsom of California, both of whom had earlier praised Donald Trump for his activating the federal government and doing a good job there. Ilhan Omar has praised Trump for his work. Bill de Blasio, who was doing nothing other than excoriating the president on an hourly basis, got a kudos from President Trump during that conference saying, oh, Mayor de Blasio is doing the best he can. We're all pulling together and so on. The thing that I saw at that press conference, and it's been going on and continues to go on, is that it seemed to me that that was the first time I saw the president, or at least during this crisis, the first time I've seen the president, not as a businessman who is trying to deal with politics, which is not what he's been doing for his entire life. All these unfair questions and biting things and character assassination, all the rest of it. At that press conference, to me, he looked exactly like a chief executive officer who had a very serious problem and was allocating resources effectively, efficiently, listening to people who knew what they were talking back, stepping away when there was a question that was better answered by either the attorney general or whoever else happened to be on stage. And I thought, this man is rising to the job. And I happen to think he's doing a real job. I used to think he was doing a good job. Now I think he's magnificent. Steve, do you get that impression that there's been a change in the president? That's one question. And then the second question is, how do you feel about his response in terms of what he is doing as the chief executive of a nation in time of a kind of a health crisis we haven't seen in well over a century, I would say?
You know, part of the fun of watching Trump is he wings it so often. This is a guy who thrives on chaos. It's how he's made himself successful in business and as a politician. He stirs things up, doesn't always know what's going to happen, but thrives on keeping everybody else off balance. It's his happy place. It's his fun zone, and it's how he usually speaks, unless he has a prepared text. And part of the thrill is you don't know what's going to happen, because not only is he winging it, but he's having fun winging it. And this is something that calls for a little less winging it than we're used to out of this president. You know, growing up, we've had, what is this? I'm thinking of, let's talk about Republican presidents and presidential contenders both. The great thing about Reagan when I was a kid is this thrill of, I'm glad somebody finally said it. Mm-hmm. And Reagan was so good at that, whether it was a joke ribbing the Democrats or a confident statement of conservative or libertarian principles. Reagan just had that quiet authority and that willingness to say the things that maybe you didn't even know you were longing to hear. George H.W. Bush could barely put three words together without stumbling over him, so we're not going to talk about him.
He rose to the occasion during the Gulf War, though. He was a different man while that was going on.
He did, and that's what I was going to say next. During those 6 months, I guess, between the occupation of Kuwait and Desert Shield, Desert Saber, he did rise to the occasion. I think he got a shot of testosterone from Margaret Thatcher at that conference when the whole thing happened. That might be it. George W. Bush was a little more frustrating in the sense that he could give a good speech, but he was a little tone deaf, and you always wondered if he was going to be able to deliver that line without making you cringe a little bit. And you were always a little on the edge of your seat, not an excitement over the speech, but just kind of waiting for that flat note that he often seemed to strike. But he didn't strike that note in the rubble of the Twin Towers the week after 9/11. That was one of the best things I've ever heard a president say when he said, "They'll all hear from us." Mitt Romney, oh dear God. He was the opposite of Reagan. If Reagan made you think, I'm so glad somebody said that. With Mitt Romney, you just wanted to reach into the TV, throttle his neck and say, why won't you say the thing? We know what it is. You have to say it or you're never going to be president. And, well, guess what? He's never going to be president. And with Trump, there's this thrill, not just that he's going to make that well, okay, Trump isn't your guy to make the weighty statement of principle like Reagan did, but Trump is your guy to say that exciting, awesome thing that puts the awful progressives in their place. And we needed that fighting spirit. We haven't had that in a very long time. And the media has just gotten so much nastier over the last 20 years, so full of not just slanted news or biased news, but outright lies that they're peddling as news. The latest being the whole quinine thing. I won't get into that whole thing right now. If I could remember the name of the whole compound, I feel much better about it. Scott, fill me in again, please.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Thank you. That's the one. It's related to quinine, and I like a gin and tonic, so I just call it quinine. That's supposed to help a little too. And yes, Trump has risen to the occasion. What we're seeing here is the executive in charge, and as much as I like the combative Trump, as much as I enjoy that thrill of the fight, the same as he does, well, from the watching it side, it doesn't have a place here when you have to work with governors who aren't of your party and mayors of cities who aren't of your party, because this is a time, just like the days after Pearl Harbor, the days after 9/11, where we really do have to come all together to fight this damn thing. And it is comforting to see that Trump can do it. It's shocking to see de Blasio do it. I'm surprised to see Cuomo do it, but pleasantly so. When's the media going to get its act together? Probably never.
Scotty, basically same question for you. Have you noticed a change in the president's tone, demeanor, and overall presence at these press conferences, number one? And number two, how do you feel about the job he's been doing?
I just saw the results of a poll yesterday or the day before that said that about 50% of Americans are pleased with the job the president's doing with regard to the coronavirus pandemic, and that 72% said they thought the governors were doing a good job. And lest you think that it's just because people don't like Trump and they do like their local state governors, the same poll showed that they believe that about, 38% of Americans said that the American people are handling this well. So it's not that it's not really a criticism of President Trump. It's that this is hard to deal with. I've been impressed with a number of things. First of all, the fact that in this time, President Trump has chosen not to go to the podium alone in the press room, but to bring his team with him and to defer to the experts when somebody asks a question that requires expertise, and to spread the responsibility as well as the authority and the praise around, not just to those people who are on the podium like Vice President Pence or Dr. Birx or Dr. Fauci or, the guy that they just brought in the other day who was a logistics guy from the Pentagon. But the fact that he's also talking about the governors in a way that's got to make the hearts of federalists, of true Republicans, beat a little bit faster, because basically he's saying, look, we're here to backstop them. We're here to help if they need it. But it's really the governors who are leading. And Vice President Pence has this phrase that I will butcher horribly, but he basically talks about how this is, locally driven decisions that are coordinated at the state level and backed up by the federal government. And I think that's really a great recipe for how to handle a crisis like this, and really the only way you can. Indeed. The criticisms of the president that he hasn't marshaled federal forces more quickly to be able to, for example, suddenly ramp up production of things, I think fall a little short, because there's no reason why any state governor can't do the same thing essentially within the bounds of his state or beyond the bounds of his state. There's no reason why the Association of Governors can't pull together and say, okay, how can we help to coordinate these resources? And I actually admire the president's restraint in that respect. He's not stepping over the governors and going straight to the people and basically saying, let me usurp their role, but he is allowing them to fulfill their role within the context of the state government. And I think that's wholly appropriate. I think that President Trump, in some ways, is a wartime president, like Dwight Eisenhower was the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces. It's not necessarily, he's not like George Patton, because we love him because of the controversial things he says or the bold action he takes. He's really found a way, as you suggested, Bill, to marshal resources, to deploy them in theater as need be, to be able to keep the lines of communication open. Having this news conference every day during the course of this crisis, I think, is a wise thing to do. Even when he doesn't have something to say, it's good for the American people and for the stock market, frankly, and for our allies around the world to see that the United States government is still functioning. It has a plan. That plan is developing. It's learning. It's growing. It's changing and adapting to situations on the ground. And I think then finally, it seems that the president is really listening to the wise counsel of his advisors. As much as he is critical of people in government, and even, making a joke at a press conference the other day where he referred to the State Department as the Deep State Department, clearly tongue-in-cheek when he made that remark. But it's clear that at the same time, he brings Mike Pompeo up to the podium. He brings his Attorney General, Bill Barr, up to the podium. He brings the guy who's in charge of the, I forget what the whole title is, but infectious diseases, Dr. Fauci, up to the podium, and gives them their time there when he could just dominate the whole thing and say, hey, give me your notes and I'll read them. And so in that sense, I think has a calming effect. I've talked to a young person the other day who basically said, look, no matter what anybody thinks of this guy, and I'm not the biggest fan in the world, but I do think that what he's doing at these news conferences is wise. It gives the sense that there is stability, that there is wisdom, and that he is willing to step aside from his own ambitions, in a sense, from his own self-aggrandizement, to defer the praise to others and the responsibility to others.
I have a quick not even a follow-up, really, just to need a little assist here on a specific question, because one of the things that the media has been doing, aside from, first of all, making people out of their mind crazy, hysterical, now the general line of attack seems to be that it's Trump versus science. This is this week's narrative, is it's Trump versus science. Here's what the doctors say, and here's what Trump says, and therefore it's irresponsible. People are going to die because of this guy, so therefore we have to vote for Joe Biden to come in and handle this crisis in exemplary fashion. One of the two stories I saw one either yesterday or the day before. I saw one just a few minutes ago, where it's another one of these stories where it's about the ongoing war between Trump and Dr. Fauci, and how Dr. Fauci, the valiant scientist, is doing his best to throw reason and logic in front of this charging bull of ignorance and bluster. And we were talking about this on our backstage show. There's a meme, of Dr. Fauci like doing a face palm during the president's campaign. The article I read about Trump versus science said that the only disagreement that he had with Dr. Fauci was that Trump called it the Chinese virus, and Fauci said, I don't call it that, and I never will. Ergo, Trump versus science. It's not against science. That's a political statement. Today, I see one. I'm looking at it right now, that he says that Trump earlier said today that he wanted the country opened by Easter. He didn't say it would be. He said he wanted it open by Easter. The article goes on to say that Dr. Fauci disagrees. Dr. Fauci says that we won't know Dr. Fauci said a week ago that we won't know for 3 weeks. Therefore, it's Trump versus science. But if you go back a week and then you go forward 3 weeks, guess what? It's Easter time. So can you guys, I just know you both had an insight into that whole Fauci versus Trump and Trump versus science thing. Could you just repeat that, what you said a little earlier? I think it was both of you guys.
Well, the one I'm thinking of was the tweet from a gentleman from Daily Caller, also has a radio show, I believe. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his name. Vince Colanese. He tweeted that Dr. Fauci says the media is trying to pit him against Trump, and pit is in quotes. I'm assuming that's the word Fauci used. And this next line is an exact quote from Fauci. That is really unfortunate. I wish that would stop. There are not differences. The president has listened to what I have said. Those are the words out of Fauci's mouth. Our press has to push this meme because Orange Man bad, and they will whip up whatever hysteria, whatever distrust that they have to sow in order to defeat this guy in November. And they're literally going to get people killed if they haven't already.
And Scotty, you had something to add to that.
I don't think we really ever know what's going on between a president and his advisors, even though we see things in public. I think the other day, for one of the news conferences they had, Dr. Fauci wasn't there. And of course, that set the media to chattering about, well, maybe he's fallen into disfavor and he's not there. Late in the story, if you read down far enough, you'd find out that Fauci was actually booked for a live shot with Sean Hannity on Fox News about the same time that news conference was going on. So maybe he had a previous commitment that he had to do something there. I guess I would say this is, and frankly, I'm one who thinks the president does better when he lets other people talk. I don't care for his off-the-cuff remarks. I think that he can run the risk of sending the wrong message inadvertently, even if his heart's in the right place. That said, I don't think that this is a problem because Dr. Fauci still has a job. The fact
and
that
what about the face palm thing? Didn't you talk about that?
Yeah, the face palm thing. I had read about that, and I actually watched that news conference live. And when it happened, my impression was that Dr. Fauci was trying to stifle a laugh because it came right after President Trump introduced Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and referred to the State Department as the Deep State Department, clearly making this, joking remark. And it looked to me, because Fauci kind of put his hand up in front of his face, and it looked to me like he was trying to stifle a laugh, which I would have been trying to stifle as well, but I didn't have to, so I just laughed out loud. Later on, I read that Fauci had said that he was actually trying to suppress a cough or something, that he had a tickle in his throat. And so things like this, when you read the media getting all in a lather, speculating about stuff like that, you got to take a lot of that with a grain of salt and say, look, a lot of times when you're involved in a personal conversation with somebody else face to face, you don't even know what's going on when you're there. How do you think you know what's going on in Washington, D.C. when you're watching it on TV and you're hearing a third-party account of it from some commentator who's got an axe to grind and a clickbait headline to write?
Yeah, I saw that facepalm thing on the article I saw a couple days ago, and I saw the article because it was listed as front and center on Drudge Report, and I found that to be a little bit disturbing and just
may I say,
true.
For whatever conservative bona fides he may have, and I don't know that he has any, but Matt Drudge is just the worst.
He really is. I kept a browser tab, formerly a browser window before we had tabs, devoted to Drudge 24/7 for probably 15 years. And now I check it once in the morning just to get my daily dose of panic and get it over with.
Daily dose of panic.
And then I close the damn thing. It's absolute trash.
So there's actually three things that I'd like to talk about very briefly. Some of the criticism of Trump is that Trump hasn't moved federal agencies, hasn't moved federal, let's just call it forces, hasn't moved federal government as fast as some people would like. And that may or may not be true. But the thing that these people either don't see, won't see, or refuse to admit is that Donald Trump is cutting out the middleman. He's not getting the federal government to get businesses involved, folks. The federal government doesn't manufacture anything. The federal government doesn't make anything. The federal government doesn't produce drugs. drugs. The federal government doesn't do any of that. This president, facing a wartime situation, may not be activating all of the department agencies that would then go and talk to the various pharmaceutical companies and the mask makers and so on. This president is going directly to the heads of those companies and asking them and telling them and dealing and cajoling and doing everything that a chief executive does to employ the power of the free market and American capitalism and have that come to the rescue. When he announced that COVID-19 testing would not be a case of standing in line at the DMV for 9 hours, but rather would be available at every single Walmart, Target, and other places around the country who have enormous parking lots used to dealing with hundreds of thousands of people a day. I thought, my God, I cannot conceive of another president who would have done something like that. And the reason that happened is because Donald Trump made some phone calls to the chief executives of those companies and said, we need to do something. And that to me is effective leadership. And I've gotten that sense throughout the whole thing. The second thing I'd like to comment on is when Donald Trump says things like, I'd like this economy open by Easter. We don't seem to be suffering from a shortage of awareness about the COVID-19 problem. That doesn't seem to be a societal ill right now, is that not enough people know about this problem. Everybody knows about the problem. Everybody's hysterical about the problem. And hundreds of thousands of business owners and millions of Americans are sitting in the bubble right now, not knowing whether they're going to have a job to go to or not knowing whether they'll be able to reopen their business. For the president to issue hopeful statements that are not commitments, but hopeful statements, and then to be excoriated by the press for saying he's minimizing the disease, that's absolutely utter nonsense. He is selling hope, and that's his job, to sell hope. Donald Trump, unlike Dr. Fauci and all the rest of the commentators, Dr. Fauci has to deal with one-timer. I did an episode of the Chronosphere Lounge yesterday called The Two-Timers. One-timer is the longer we maintain this shutdown economy and social quarantine, the more lives we'll save. No question about that. Dr. Fauci's job is to make sure we save as many lives as possible. He's a public health official. The best way to do that would be to shut the economy down completely forever. You won't ever have to worry about infectious diseases again. That's his job, and he is giving advice along those lines. But the other timer that's running is every single hour that this economy is essentially shut down by legal mandate is another hour where economic damage is being done. And as we get deeper into this, that damage becomes less temporary and more permanent. Donald Trump has to take a look at that clock too. He has to address that issue. Dr. Fauci doesn't. He doesn't have to worry about the economy. He doesn't have to worry about when we make the decision to bring the economy back online to some degree. That's not Fauci's job. That's Trump's job. That's why I consider him to be a war president. And the final reason why I consider him to be a war president is that Donald Trump is going to have to, probably has already, had to come to grips with the cold, hard reality of the situation we're in now. And that cold, hard reality is this. We are trying to save as many lives as possible. And there comes a point where the actions that we would be doing in order to save the maximum number of lives will eventually cost us more lives downstream. An 8-year total depression and the destruction of the world economy is worse than the COVID-19 outbreak. And so what Donald Trump has to deal with and what he's going to be criticized for, and what I want everybody who's listening to this to think about is this. This war president is going to have to make a decision. It's probably going to be a personal decision. And that decision is going to be, at what point do we start to unthrottle the economy, raise the risk of infection, raise the potential death toll, in order to save the economy so that greater damage isn't done downstream? That is a war decision made by a president. If you've got a son or a daughter in the military, if you find out your son is going to Iwo Jima, you don't want those boys to go ashore. And if they do go ashore, you want your guy to be on the last wave and you want him where the typewriters are on the beach filling out reports. It's what you want as a person who cares about life. But the president of the United States has to decide that we're going to have to sacrifice these people and 7,000 Marines are going to have to die so that we can save 100,000 airmen who managed to land at Iwo Jima on the way back from their B-29 missions over Japan. The president has to look at the big picture, and a war president has to make decisions that are going to cost people their lives because he believes it's necessary to save more lives downstream. I made this thumbnail for the segment several days ago. I didn't make it after the show. I made it 2 or 3 days ago. I made it on a whim after I listened to that press conference. As you can see, it's a picture of President Trump, an engraving of him on $1 million bill, and below that it says the war president. Being a war president is not easy. And the problem with being a war president is no matter what you do, you will face criticism and you will have lives laid at your feet. The decision to go ashore at Normandy cost a lot of people's lives, and General Eisenhower had to make a decision, and all war presidents have had to make decisions like this. And I personally have never second-guessed a war president for doing what he thought he had to do at the moment he had to do it. I'm not there. I don't have to make the decision. I'm glad I don't have to make the decision. And there's nothing more disgusting to me than the idea that somebody who was as far away from that decision as possible is going to look back on the decisions that Dwight Eisenhower made as general and start to list all of the areas where things went wrong and things he should have known that he didn't know and so on. This is beyond that now. I think he's doing a good job. I think that the politicians of the country, with a few notable exceptions, are pulling together. I think the American people are behaving well and behaving better every single day. And I think it's time for us to understand that nothing's going to be accomplished by criticizing this president while he's trying to make these decisions. If you want to have a postmortem afterwards, you're more than welcome to do that. But I think he's doing a marvelous job. I think he's magnificent. And I cannot imagine a better person in the job for this particular crisis, where the ability for the American capitalist system to manufacture out of thin air respirators, drugs, all of these things are the actual arsenal that we're going to use to put down this virus, which is going to very soon regret coming out of the trees and monkeys, and going to deeply regret messing around with this species in particular. So that's it for this Right Angle, brought to you by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. Very few people are able to keep these messages coming, and we'd love to have you be one of them. Until next week on Right Angle, we will be here for the duration, and then we'll be here after that. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.